Good morning, everyone, and good evening to some of you joining us today. Thank you for joining the training workshop on integrating short-lived climate pollutants in urban plans and initiatives, co-organized by Cleaner Asia Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, Local Government Sustainability for Sustainability East Asia, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and the UN Environment Program under the Strengthening Air Quality Communities of Practice in Asia Pacific project supported by the US Department of State. We have just celebrated the International Day for Clean Air and Blue Skies early this week and also concluded the main sessions of the Asia Pacific Clean Air Partnership Joint Forum. And the message that resonates among us is very clear that air pollution and climate are the next curves that we need to address urgently and at scale. And the insights and learnings shared over the past 2 days by stakeholders across the region and globally further underline that cities indeed have opportunity to harness the co-benefits of improving air quality and protecting public health while also mitigating climate change. Now, before we start, I'd like to remind everyone that the workshop video and chat will all be recorded. And if you have questions, please send them through the Q&A box, and the experts and myself will acknowledge them later. So we have a rich agenda for today's training, which we hope would enable you to gain understanding of short-lived climate pollutants or SLCPs and their co-benefits, learning about methods and tools of quantifying co-benefits and how these can inform policies and decision-making. And lastly, we hope that you will become familiarized with country and city experiences on how co-benefits and SLCPs can be integrated or incorporated into institutional arrangements and decision-making processes. So without further ado, I would like to call on Ms. Kay Patdu to deliver the opening remarks. Kay is an Associate Program Officer at the UN Environment Program Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, who is coordinating the Asia Pacific Clean Air Partnership or APCAP, a regional partnership working to achieve measurable reductions in air pollution and emissions in Asia Pacific. Over to you, Kay.
Thanks, Sang, and good morning, everyone. Most of us living in this region are based in cities and in urban areas. We have unplanned, unmanaged urbanization and a rising demand for resources, energy, motorized transport, contribute to serious urban air pollution and also to the climate crisis. It is estimated that cities contribute up to 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions and 75% of resource use. Cities contribute to, but at the same time are vulnerable to, the triple planetary crisis of pollution, climate change, and biodiversity loss. But the good news is that cities have not sat back idly in the face of all of these challenges. They have taken bold steps to beat air pollution for a healthy air and a healthy planet. And we have seen this even before COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen many cities adopt actions to address air pollution, protect our climate. Some of these include urban farming, electric mobility, improving services for public transport and solid waste management, and even exploring zero-emission buildings and nature-based solutions. This is very encouraging to see, as we know that air pollution and climate change are inherently linked, with many air pollutants affecting the climate and sharing common sources with greenhouse gases. Just yesterday, at the third Asia Pacific Clean Air Partnership Joint Forum, we heard city leaders share their innovative solutions for clean air and for climate. Just one maybe that we want to share, a common innovation that the city shared is the promotion of electric mobility. For example, Jakarta shared their efforts in transitioning to electric buses and setting up supporting infrastructure for that. The Gyeonggi province in the Republic of Korea also talked about how they have established low emission zones and encouraged the use of electric vehicles. These solutions may also gain additional momentum as we have seen last year, how the COVID-19 lockdowns can bring a temporary reduction in some pollution levels. Of course, we know that this is not a sustainable approach. But looking at these solutions is increasingly important, and investing in cleaner practices is key, as these will not only help improve air quality and protect health, contribute to climate action, but also enhance economic recovery and support our overall development goals. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the simple fact that we must redefine our relationship with our environment, refine our relationship with nature, and that a healthy planet is central to healthy people. To redefine this relationship, we cannot work in silos any longer. We need these integrated approaches for air pollution and climate, and solutions that provide multiple benefits, the best value for our investment. We have already taken steps to advance this approach. As you may recall, in 2018, we worked with CCAC and many of the partners that are helping us deliver this training today to identify 25 policy and technology clean air measures, which could provide numerous benefits for public health, agriculture, and climate. We're pleased to say that 3 years since its launch, many partners are already supporting implementation of these cleaner measures and have taken them forward. One of the recent examples is our partnership with UNICEF to emphasize benefits for children with the implementation of 25 clean air measures. So we're pleased to have this opportunity today to share knowledge, experience, to further strengthen how we can proceed with integrating air pollution and climate change planning. We look forward to learning from our esteemed experts and hearing your views, experiences, and challenges, and how we can support in taking on this challenge. We know we are facing a climate emergency, especially with the recent IPCC report signaling a code red for humanity. But transformative change is possible and definitely within our reach. I would like to take this opportunity to also thank the United States Department of State for their generous support to help us strengthen regional communities of practice on air quality in the region. And of course, to our partners, Clean Air Asia, Climate and Clean Air Coalition, ICLEI, and IGES for their tireless efforts to help us in delivering this event. I look forward to very fruitful discussions with you this morning, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kay, for that wonderful message. Indeed, we have learned a lot in the past 3 days, and it's very clear that there's work to be done, and we have to and we have to do this urgently. And so, to give us an overview of the co-benefits training curriculum and, of course, the objectives of the workshop, may I call on Dr. Eric Zisman, a senior policy researcher and area leader at the Institute for Global Environmental Studies in Hayama in Japan, who for the past 2 decades have conducted research on environmental issues in Asia, including working with government, academia, and NGOs. He has published books and articles on various topics such as air pollution regulation, environmental law, multi-level governance, low carbon development, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Eric, over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Dang, for the nice introduction. And thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us from Asia and across the world. I'm delighted to be here speaking to you today from Hayama, Japan, about an hour and a half south of Tokyo. And as Dang suggested, I will start by just giving us a little bit of introduction to this training curriculum, which a lot of what will be presented today is based upon, and also go over the objectives of the workshop. And usually, pre-COVID times, we would do this in person, and I would go around and give a high five to everybody in the room. But I hope that everybody can get sort of a virtual high five and feel my energy transmitting through the Zoom. So here we go. For today's session, I'd like to first briefly just give you some insights into this training curriculum and what it's based upon, and then we'll go into the objectives. So this presentation will have 3 points. This city needs assessment that led to the training curriculum, and then our objectives. So first and foremost, a few years ago, colleagues in ICLEI, IGES, Clean Air Asia, as well as many other partners in the room here, were interested in trying to understand what cities would need to know to work on a more integrated approach to air pollution and climate change planning. Of course, before we got into what they would need to know, we wanted to know if they needed to know something. And what we did is we distributed a needs assessment survey to cities throughout Asia. We had about 60 cities respond. And as you can see very clearly from these results, the interest in integrating planning was quite high. About 95% of the respondents indicated interest, with only less than 5% were saying they were unsure. But at the same time, the actual experience with this integrated planning was not as positive. So about 40% did not have experience or were unsure whether they had experience. So from there, we tried to understand, well, what would people really need to know that are working in cities? They were going to integrate their air pollution and climate change plans. And based upon our survey, we found out that there were basically 3 areas, 3 need areas, if you will. One is these core concepts. 2 is what we'll call decision-making tools. And 3 is integrated planning. And how you could actually do that to build relationships with institutions within cities and with higher level governments. And based upon this needs assessment and these need areas, colleagues from IGES, ICLEI, Clean Air Asia, with the support of the Climate Change and Clean Air Coalition, developed a training curriculum, which we've actually used in many cities in China, Korea, and throughout Southeast Asia. And you can download this training curriculum on the CCAC website, as well as the IGES website. The link is right there at the bottom. And if you can't find it, please drop me an email after this session. And basically, as suggested previously, I mean, the curriculum gives you some overview of core concepts, what are co-benefits, the multiple benefits of actions that help mitigate climate change and deliver on other development priorities. So these are actions that stabilize the climate, prevent pollution, also improve health, but they can also extend out to doing things like improving gender empowerment or creating more socioeconomic equity. So they can also deliver on other sustainable development goals. So these multi-benefit type of solutions deliver called co-benefits. And then the other thing that we wanted to try to highlight in this curriculum is, why do we want to have these co-benefits? Well, I would suggest to you one of the things that's really important for many of our city level policymakers, and also national level policymakers too, is to move not only from, good policy, but also to good politics. And one of the challenges that we've noticed is that when talking about climate change, it's frequently still viewed as a pretty long-term, global, and uncertain problem. That is, the time dimension, the space dimension, and the certainty dimension still pretty high. This is especially important for decision makers, in your mayor's office that want to do things now, they want to do things locally, and they don't want to have a lot of uncertainty. But if we can make sure that our solutions to climate change are also tackling air pollution, also tackling health, then we can change the time, the space, and the uncertainty dimensions. So by doing both of these things simultaneously, we can help move this transition from good policy to good politics. And in order to do that, as I suggested previously, one of the things we need is good decision-making tools. So throughout the session, we'll talk a little bit about some of these decision-making tools. Some of these will feed into emissions inventories. Some will feed into more sector-specific analysis. And these include things like a tool that's been developed and refined by SEI, Stockholm Environment Institute, with the US EPA, known as the LEAP IBC. There's also the GAINS tool that's been developed by YASA. Clean Air Asia has a series of city-level tools known as TEAMP. And IGES is working with colleagues at Kyushu University on a series of technology-specific tools. So for instance, we're working on a tool for heat-only boilers. We also are working on a tool for wastewater management, as well as solar energy. So there's a lot of tools out there, and we'll give you some insights on how to use them. They're also touched upon in the curriculum. And then last but not least is, so once we have good analysis based upon the tools, once we have a good political argument, we also need to make sure our institutional arrangements are well designed to support a more integrated approach. And the curriculum gives you some examples of how this can be done, not only in Asia, moving, for instance, from the case of Seoul, which was sort of more of a bottom-up grassroots approach, to the case of Tokyo, which started in the city of Tokyo and then spread gradually throughout the whole country, to the case of California, which is outside of the Asian region, but demonstrates a really interesting approach to facilitating coordination between, in this case, a state level government and then city level governments like Los Angeles and San Francisco. So integrated planning and institutional arrangements are also part of the story. That leads me to the objectives of today's workshop. So first and foremost, we're going to give you some insights into what our SLCPs and co-benefits. I've already touched upon co-benefits, and that will help us frame what are SLCPs. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools and methods that I highlighted previously. And then we'll share some country and city level experiences on how to move these things forward. Once again, focusing on some of the policy and institutional reforms that were also mentioned previously. So once again, delighted to be here from Japan. Really looking forward to an informative and fruitful session, and great to be in the room, the Zoom room as it is, with so many enthusiastic people. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. And before we start the training proper, of course, as Eric mentioned earlier, it would be great to have this face-to-face, but for now, I'd kindly request all our panelists to turn on their cameras for a quick group photo. And then after that, my colleague Dana will help us with an icebreaker survey that will also help us further understand the needs of cities hoping to enhance integration between air pollution and climate planning. So colleagues, requesting if you could also help me take a photo of our panelists. So ready? 1, 2, 3, and smile. All right, I think we got that. So turning over to Dana for the icebreaker survey.
Good morning, everyone. Checking if you can hear me and my audio is clear.
Yes, Dana.
Thank you, Dang. So right now I will be sharing my screen for the icebreaker. So requesting everyone to go to slido.com and enter the code, or you can just quickly scan the QR code so that you will be directed to this icebreaker. Okay, so while the participants are going to the slido.com, I'll go through the questions. So the first question for our icebreaker is, does your city have an interest in integrating air quality and climate change planning? So I'll just wait for a short bit just to have the participants answer this question. So again, for the participants, requesting if you can go to slido.com, enter the code 412881, or you can scan the QR code being shown on your screen. And you can start answering the first survey question. So again, the survey question is, does your city have an interest in integrating air quality and climate change planning? Okay, waiting. Okay, so there are some participants who are already accessing the poll. So let's wait for a bit more. Okay, so Dang also shared the link to the Slido site so that you can via the chat box so that you can quickly access it. Okay, so waiting a few more seconds. Okay, so there are more participants who are answering. So as you can see, you can see it live stream or in real time, the changes in the number of respondents. Okay. Okay, let's just waiting for a few more seconds before I go to the next question, since more participants are answering. Okay, so I'll be moving on. So majority of the participants, 74%, answered yes. Okay, so around 70. And then around 1/4 of our participants are unsure and around 10% said no. Okay, so moving to the next. So I think more are still answering. Okay, so right now it's around 1/3 each. Okay, so the next question, okay, so participants have already answered also. So one way to achieve co-benefits on air quality, health, etc. is by reducing emissions of short-lived climate pollutants such as black carbon. So are you familiar with SLCPs? So there are currently 29 respondents, so around 50% answered yes and 50% answered no. Okay. And then the next question for our survey, what are the biggest barriers to integrated air quality and climate change planning in your city? So check all that apply. So the choices are limited knowledge of decision-making support tools and assessment models that could contribute to integrated planning. Second item is limited data to analyze impacts of integrated air quality and climate change planning. The next one is limited knowledge to concepts such as co-benefits. And the last one is limited funding to implement policies reflecting integrated planning. So as you can see, the order is changing based on how many are choosing that option. So based on this, majority answered that the first option, the limited knowledge on decision-making support tools, is one of the biggest barriers, followed by the limited data and then limited knowledge, and lastly, limited funding. So I think that's the last question for the survey. So thank you for the participants in participating. So we currently have 41 respondents, and you can still answer it while after this. Okay, handing over the screen to you, Dang.
Thank you, Dana. Let me just
Stop my share screen. Okay, thank you. Again, thank you to the participants.
All right. So thank you, Dina, for that. The next part of our program is that we will go now into the core concepts of air pollution and climate integration. And I would like to call on, again, Dr. Eric Zisman and also Professor Toshi Takemura, a distinguished professor in the Research Institute for Applied Mechanics, Kyushu University in Japan. He obtained his Doctor of Science degree in the University of Tokyo in 2001. Let me just share my full screen. Sorry for that. Sorry. Okay, so he obtained his Doctor of Science degree in the University of Tokyo in 2001, and his research covers numerical simulations of climate change and air pollution caused by atmospheric aerosols. So Dr. Takemura is a highly cited researcher from 2014 to 2020 and was awarded with the Japan Academy Medal in 2019. He's the lead author of the fifth assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and concurrently a member of the Science Panel of the Asia Pacific Clean Air Partnership. So let us all welcome Dr. Eric Zisman and also Professor Toshi Takemura. Over to you, Eric.
Okay, thank you so much, Dang, and I will continue to offer some insights into these core concepts, then opening the door for Takamura Sensei to provide some important science and some of the recent findings on these impacts from an atmospheric science perspective. So let me share my screen. Okay, so for introducing some of the core concepts, basically I have three objectives for this presentation. First, I will introduce this idea of co-benefits and SLCPs. I noted that for maybe 40 to 50% of the audience, SLCPs is still a new term. I'll offer some different perspectives on co-benefits that also bring in this idea of SLCPs. And then we'll begin to think a little bit about how this can be applied to actual actions within cities. And those themes will be picked up again later in our session, for instance, by our colleague, Dr. Kimon. But let me begin by first flagging what is becoming increasingly obvious and worrying at the same time. First of all, when we talk about climate change, I think it's important to recognize that 2020 was the warmest year on record. As Kay mentioned, with the recent release of the first working group's report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are now in a situation they're calling Code Red, which basically suggests that we can no longer delay action and we need to accelerate transformative change. And I mean, this is evident to many of us who live in Asia. We can see this on the ground. So this is some unfortunate footage from Typhoon Haiyan, which affected the Philippines in 2013. And we also see this in places like Bangladesh, where we're already experiencing outpouring of what they're called climate refugees. And this is due in part to sea level rise, which could potentially inundate about 2/5 of the country by 2040, 2050, unless we dramatically change the way that we produce energy and many of our lifestyles. So these impacts are becoming increasingly obvious. I mean, we can see these at a very individual level too. I mean, this picture is sort of an unfortunate paradox illustrating, you know, some of the same things that we're doing to consume energy are also leading to flooding. And this is from a PC cafe in Southeast Asia, and puts a very personal spin on some of these impacts. And then let me turn, of course, to air pollution impacts. So I mean, air pollution is far and away the biggest environmental health impact, and has significant implications for respiratory functions. You can see this very clearly from this illustration, not only of air pollution from power plants in places like China, which is the background here, but also in terms of impacts even in places like Sydney, Australia. So this two pictures of lungs here. One is from a normal, healthy resident in Australia, and the diseased lung is from somebody who lives very close to a power plant. And in fact, I mean, if you look at some of the literature from the World Health Organization these days, there's a lot of emphasis on the similarities between breathing in air pollution and smoking. And of course, we're also recognizing that these problems are closely related. I mean, air pollution and climate change come from many of the same sources, whether that be fossil fuels, some cases also agriculture, but they're also mutually reinforcing problems. So this is once again a slide that puts a very personal spin on this for me. I think many of you might be aware that for the past few months, we've seen serious wildfires in the state of California, which is in the western part of the United States. But what's been, I mean, of course, this has been heartbreaking and worrisome for those living in California. But what has also been quite remarkable is if you go to the eastern part of the United States. So I grew up in a city called Boston, which is on the east coast of the United States. Well, a lot of the air pollution that's coming from these wildfires is making its way all the way across the United States. And so this is a picture of the main river that sits in the heart of Boston. And you can see it's covered in smog. And this is from the wildfires in California. And as you can see, there's also, you know, a bit of what we call a vicious cycle here, in that, you know, the climate change creates conditions for the wildfires, also leads to the air pollution. This air pollution in some ways also has impacts on climate, both in the near term and to some extent in the medium term, and emphasizes that, you know, this system is creating problems, multiple dimensions of development, and once again, the relationship between climate change and air pollution. Okay, so I mean, the key thing that we want to do, of course, is be able to tackle both of these problems at the same time. And we'll go into this in a little bit more depth as we move through the presentation. But one of the key benefits that we'll get from doing that, of course, is for health. And this slide comes from a report that was published a few years ago that Kay Padu mentioned in her presentation, and will be picked up again later here in other presentations. It's called the Solutions Report, and it basically underlines that the impacts of reducing air pollution, especially particulate matter in Asia and Pacific, are huge. Approximately 90% of the population in Asia Pacific still breathes air that is above the WHO recommended guidelines of 10 micrograms per cubic meter. Once again, this is it's a big issue in much of Asia, but it also is an issue in outside of Asia too. You see, for instance, the United States, even Germany, the tail end of this curve here on some of the what we call disability adjusted life years. These are one ways of measuring the health impacts from air pollution. And so one of the things that we wanted to try to do then is to try to tackle this problem, of course, and to tackle it in a way that would both take care of air pollution and climate change. And when we first started talking about doing this, we first started talking about co-benefits. Actually, the term has been around for about 30 years or 30 years or so, but about 15 years or so, it started to really make its way into policy discussions. And I would suggest to you that the co-benefits, all of the benefits of policies and actions that mitigate climate change and deliver other benefits for air quality and other development concerns. When we first started looking at this, much of the discussion focused on the issue from a climate perspective. So there was a strong emphasis on how we could mitigate greenhouse gases. And in mitigating those greenhouse gases, we would also be able to achieve other development benefits or achieve improvements in air quality and even some things such as technology transfer or jobs, what have you. But the entry point was mitigating greenhouse gases, and there was a strong emphasis on projects under what used to be called the Clean Development Mechanism, or the CDM. Okay, and so from there, okay, hold on for a quick second. I'm having a bit of a technical difficulty, so hold on for just a second.
No problem, Eric. Thank you.
All right. Let me see. Okay, can you guys see that still? Or can you see that?
Yes, Eric.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can
Great.
see it.
All right, so let me just try moving it without full screen. So we moved from a place where we're looking primarily at climate policies and from a climate entry point to thinking more about development policies. And this was particularly important in a developing country context because, you know, for many developing countries, things like environmental policies, economic policies, social policies, they came before climate policies. And so from this perspective, this more development oriented perspective, you would first try to achieve some of these core development goals and then gradually achieve climate change objectives as a sort of climate co-benefit. Now, this leads us to a third perspective on co-benefits. And this third perspective is really where we start to bring in this idea of SLCPs. So you had, you know, at first the climate change community thinking about co-benefits from greenhouse gas mitigation projects, especially the CDM. Then you had the development community thinking a little bit more about development policies. But then the air pollution folks came along and said, well, actually, there's a lot of air pollution policies that mitigate what would eventually be called short-lived climate pollutants that have an impact on the climate in the near term. And by the near term, we're talking primarily somewhere in the neighborhood of even a week to 2 weeks for things like black carbon, all the way up to about 10 years or so for methane, which would lead to tropospheric ozone. But these pollutants would stay up in the atmosphere for a much shorter time than the main greenhouse gas of carbon dioxide. And so they were short-lived. They went up in the atmosphere for a short period of time. But in that short period of time, they would have a pretty significant impact on the climate, especially black carbon, pure black carbon, would have a really significant warming impact. And so if we wanted to do something about climate change in the near term, then we would try to tackle these short-lived climate pollutants. These include things like black carbon, tropospheric ozone, methane, which doubles both as a greenhouse gas and a short-lived climate pollutant, as well as what are known as HFCs. So these near-term benefits could be achieved by tackling SLCPs, and also you would get benefits for health, productivity, and what have you. So you have these three different perspectives on co-benefits that emerged over about a 15-year period, and we keep on seeing more and more applications of these different approaches in different policies and actions, especially in cities. And this slide right here just gives you a sense of what are the key short-lived climate pollutants. Once again, you have your black carbon, your tropospheric ozone, methane, and HFCs. And once again, highlighting that these removing these types of pollutants will have impact on the climate, health, and also very important for especially tropospheric ozone, crop yields. And so even in cities where you're going to be reducing SLCPs, for instance, from the transport or the waste management sector, some of those actions will also have good impacts on things outside of cities, like growing food. Okay, now we'll go into this in a lot more depth a little bit later in the presentation, but I just wanted to highlight that by looking at co-benefits through these three different lenses, from a GHG climate perspective, from a development perspective, and then from an SLC perspective, we've actually been able to identify different measures which are more or less aligned with these different perspectives. And this refers back to these 25 clean air measures that Kay mentioned previously and will be brought up again later in the presentation. One set of measures focuses on what we call conventional measures for air quality. And these measures will have impact on primarily air quality and health. They won't have such a huge impact, modest impact, but not a huge impact on SLCPs. And they might actually, because a lot of times they increase the energy use, they might actually increase some of your greenhouse gases. Then there's a second set of measures that are part of this group of 25. These are known as next generation air quality measures. And these are things that are tackling primarily your SLCPs, especially your black carbon, and to some extent your methane. And then a third group of measures are going to tackle your greenhouse gases as well as other air pollutants. And these are called development priority measures. And these 25 measures, I'm just going to go quickly through them. But once again, we'll cover these in greater detail throughout the training. So the conventional controls are focusing a lot on end of the pipe type of controls on stationary sources, especially industries and power plants, and also mobile sources, vehicles. The next stage measures, which are going to have stronger links to an air pollution perspective on co-benefits and SLCPs. This includes things like reducing the burning of crop residues. Especially important in cities, we're learning, is reducing residential waste burning. And it also feeds out to things like reducing emissions from paint factories or solvent use in refineries. These are recognized as an increasingly important source of these SLCPs. And then the last group is the development priority measures. So this is going to be able to tackle your long-term climate change concerns, your GHGs, as well as some air pollutants. And this is going to focus a lot on larger scale sources by transitioning to renewable energy, energy efficiency, promoting electric vehicles. And there are also some measures that focus on things that are a little bit outside the scope of what we usually consider for air pollution, like, for instance, wastewater treatment. Okay, so there's these three different baskets of measures. And what we're recognizing is if we want to achieve co-benefits, and this is for city level officials and also national level officials, typically we're going to need a strategy that picks solutions from these three different baskets or three different categories. And this is how we're working towards a more unified perspective on co-benefits, in many ways bringing together the three perspectives that I offered previously. So that's going to mean that, we want to take care of conventional air pollution control with end of the pipe technologies. This will be good for local air pollution. It might have a adverse, or it might actually lead to more long-term warming. So we need to offset some of that because you're going to get more energy use, and moderate impact on short-term climate change with SLCPs. Then we also need to pick from the next generation controls, focusing a lot more on the SLCPs. So in cities, this is going to be a strong emphasis, for instance, on waste management and reducing the burning of waste. And then your development priority measures. This is once again transitioning to renewable energy, but also in a city context, improving industrial energy efficiency, what have you. And the precise combination of different options will vary depending upon one city to the next. And that's also one of the reasons where we're going to need to think a little bit more about the types of tools you use to identify, what would be the appropriate combination for your city. So I will stop there, say thank you very much, and say that I'm honored to then turn the microphone over to Takamoto Sensei, who is one of the most esteemed scholars on these issues, not only in Japan, but in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. So checking if Professor Takemura can share screen.
Okay. Can I start the lecture?
Yes, Professor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good morning and good evening. So I'm Toshi Takemura, Kyushu University, Japan. So this session is based on the actually AppCap policy brief already issued and can download from this link. And please download the policy brief. So the main content is the scientific basic information to you in order to understand why the co-control between air pollution and climate change is very important, including a mechanism of climate change due to short-lived climate forces and short-lived climate pollutants, including atmospheric aerosols and trace gases. And the latest scientific evaluation of the effect of short-lived climate forces on the climate change. So the basis for considering the issue of climate change is the energy balance, as well as various physical phenomena. So they are our most interest tend to the change in the surface air temperature change, but the basic mechanism of climate change is have to consider the energy balance. The Earth maintains its balance by receiving energy from the sun, of course, and emitting infrared energy from the Earth. So greenhouse gases change their energy balance by absorbing them and actually isotropically re-emitting infrared radiation from the Earth to space. On the other hand, aerosols, suspended particle matter, changing the energy balance mainly by scattering and absorbing sunlight. In this slide, the energy imbalance is 0.6 by human activity, but actually it is estimated that more than 2 watts per square meter of energy is currently stored in the Earth extra due to human activities. And the overall global average is about, actually the energy budget is about 240 watt per square meter of energy being exchanged by receiving energy from the sun and emitting infrared energy, so that the current climate change about 2 watt per square meter is occurring with about only 1% energy shift. That is a human anthropogenic climate change. Okay, so let's review the mechanism of climate change caused by greenhouse gases. The main greenhouse gases that need to be considered in the current climate change are CO2, methane, N2O, HFCs, tropospheric ozone, and water vapor, which absorb the specific wavelength infrared radiation. That is, including short-lived climate pollutants of methane, HFCs, and tropospheric ozone. So actually, water vapor is one of the greenhouse gas, actually. But because there is a large amount of water vapor in the atmosphere, in nature, so direct emissions of water vapor from fossil fuel consumption and forest fire do not need to be considered. But the process of acceleration of global warming due to increasing the amount of water vapor that can be contained in the air due to the temperature increase by the other factor of global warming is very important. That means if the temperature increase, the ability of content of the water vapor in the atmosphere is larger. So that process is very important. So the role of greenhouse gas is absorption of infrared radiation from the ground and sea surface and atmosphere. And they emit infrared radiation isotropically. For example, in this slide, shown in this slide, if each CO2 absorbs 24 infrared radiation from the ocean, land, and atmosphere, CO2 will emit the same amount of infrared radiation, each 24. Then the outgoing radiation is 12 multiplied by 3, so total is 36 in this situation. If the greenhouse gases increase in the troposphere, the extra infrared radiation from the sea surface ground and atmosphere is absorbed by the greenhouse gases, and they emit infrared radiation isotropically. Then the outgoing radiation is reduced to be 24. 6 plus 6 plus 12. So in order to balance with the incoming solar radiation energy, the outgoing, in order to balance with the incoming solar radiation, it is constant incoming radiation. The outgoing infrared radiation have to increase to balance the energy budget. Here, we need knowledge of actually, so it is specified as Stefan Boltzmann law. The energy, that law is the energy emission from material is proportional to the force power of temperature. So from this law, we can understand that emission ability of the infrared radiation is stronger if the temperature is increasing. Then to increase the temperature, heat is transported from the ocean and land surface by convection. Convection is essential to warm the atmosphere. This results in the temperature increase, global warming. For example, the emitted infrared radiation increased from 24 to 32. So for example, by the increasing temperature, so the emitted infrared radiation from the ocean, atmosphere, and land increase from 24 to 32. Then 32, 16 and 16 and 16 by divided by 8. So total outgoing radiation about 8 plus 8 plus 16 by the 32. But actually, outgoing infrared radiation is not back to the normal is 36. So because the CO2 concentration rapidly increases and because the ocean temperature change is very slow, so it is difficult to adjust the radiation budget by present human activity. Actually, the over 90% of excess energy is stored in the ocean. Okay, so that is a mechanism of the scientific mechanism of the climate change by greenhouse gases. The next slide shows the basic mechanism of aerosol effect, suspended particle matter on climate change. So it is categorized by the aerosol radiation interaction and aerosol cloud interactions. The first one is a change in the energy budget by scattering and absorbing solar radiation. That is an aerosol radiation interaction. So it is simple. So for example, the transparent and white particles scatter the solar radiation. On the other hand, dark aerosol particles such as black carbon absorb the solar radiation as well as scatter the sunlight. And actually additional change the amount atmospheric stability in the vertical direction and saturated water vapor pressure. Next one, the aerosol cloud interaction. In terms of microphysical aerosol cloud interactions, the size of cloud droplet is getting smaller with increasing aerosol particles in the atmosphere. That results in the enhancement of scattering sunlight by clouds. The smaller cloud droplets are also thought to change the cloud lifetime and then bring about change in precipitation. So actually, it is additional information that hydrophobic aerosol particles act as ice nuclei, which freeze supercooled cloud droplets. Actually, water cloud and ice cloud have very different properties with respect to solar and infrared radiation. And there are some climate change mechanisms by aerosols. For example, reducing reflectance by dirt and melting snow and ice by deposition of black carbon, of dark aerosols such as black carbon. Yes, for example, to calculate and evaluate the aerosol effects on climate change quantitatively, I have developed a global aerosol climate model named Sprinters model. This software is incorporated into Japanese climate model, Miroku, and the Earth System model, Miroku ESM, Earth System model. Although I cannot explain in detail due to time limit today, Sprinters calculate aerosol transport processes of emission, advection, convection, diffusion, sulfur chemistry, wet deposition, and dry deposition for main tropospheric aerosols of sulfate organics, black carbon, sawdust, and sea salt, as well as their precursor gases. Sprinters also calculate the aerosol radiation interaction uh, uh, and aerosol cloud interaction explained in the previous slide in order to calculate climate change by aerosols. Actually, this is just the introduction. Using Sprinter's model in the previous slide, actually I have operated aerosol forecast system including PM2.5 and dust aerosols since 2007 voluntarily. Based on the calculation result, it shows the predicted concentrations of PM2.5 and dust for each prefecture in Japan in 4 levels, and also displays animation like that of their transport in the Asian region and the global scale. The forecast information is provided through not only the website but also newspapers, TVs, other apps, and so on. This is just information. This is example of simulated of global aerosol transport by Sprinter's model. Time is limited today, so if you are interested, you can watch it on this YouTube site. So this is a latest evaluation of each climate forcing agents by human activities, including short-lived components in the IPCC 6th assessment report issued last month, August. The left figure shows the global and annual mean changes in the energy budget divided into the emitted components indicated in the left column, this one. The color of each bar indicates component in the atmosphere, which means that the emitted components can transform other ones or themselves with chemical reaction. For example, so the methane is reminded on methane in the atmosphere, but so the change in this is a change in the ozone concentration, for example. Of course, so CO2 is a primary contributor to the human activity climate change, but you can see that the short-lived climate forces also largely contributed to the climate change. For example, methane is the next largest positive energy budget, including contribution to tropospheric ozone production. This evaluation includes not only direct warming effect of, for example, CFCs, HCFCs, and HFCs, but also destruction effect of CFCs and HCFCs on stratospheric ozone. For example, this green line, green bars. And also, actually, it is complicated that NOx increase result in methane reduction, shown in this point, which is a greenhouse gas. Of course, methane is the greenhouse gas. Due to this phenomena, an increase in actually OH radical, hydroxyl radical, although NOx increase result in air pollution. And VOC is a precursor of tropospheric ozone, that is a greenhouse gas, and the VOC and CO increase methane. This is an orange bar through chemical reaction with OH radical. And it is very important that aerosols have the large effect of negative energy budget, explained in the previous slide, that the mechanism of climate change by aerosols, aerosol particles. Sulfate aerosols produced from SO2, sulfur dioxide, is a primary contributor of negative forcing through the aerosol radiation and the aerosol cloud interactions. We have to understand that the emission reduction of SO2 is essential for mitigation air pollution, but it results in reducing the cooling effect. The right figure shows the conversion from the energy budget change to the surface air temperature using a very simplified energy balance model. Of course, although ideally a coupled atmosphere ocean model should be used. So anyway, it indicates that a strong suggestion of the importance of controlling short-lived climate materials for mitigating global warming. So for example, so the left column shows the change in the temperature by carbon dioxide, but the second one is a methane, and also this is a VOC and CO, and this is black carbon, and also the negative one is this is sulfur dioxide, and this is a nitrogen oxide, NOx. So these materials are short-lived climate forces, so that have a large contribution to change the atmospheric temperature. So these are result. This is a result from my latest studies using a coupled atmosphere ocean model. This figure shows the change in the surface air temperature due to complete removal of fuel SO2, sulfur dioxide, from fossil fuel consumption. And the top figure shows the CO2 concentration of, for example, present level. About this is smaller than the present, so the 369 ppm in the top figure. And bottom figure shows that is twice CO2 concentration of 738 ppm. So this indicates that if SO2 emissions are to be reduced in air pollution control, it is important to keep CO2 concentration as low as possible for mitigating climate change. So that is the same amount of SO2 reduction, but it depends on the CO2 concentration for increasing air temperature. So from this research result, the message is that the simple emission reduction of short-lived components result in clean air, of course, but while contributing to global warming. So it is essential to consider mitigation, both air pollution and global warming, simultaneously. So the right figure shows the change in the surface air temperature shown in the vertical axis, with a change in the energy budget by horizontal. Energy budget by horizontal axis for sulfate also shown in the blue one, and the black carbon, red one. So in the previous slide, the simplified conversion from the energy budget change to the temperature, but this figure indicates that the temperature change with energy budget change much depend on chemical component actually. That much different between the sulfate aerosols and black carbon. So because climate change research on short-lived climate pollutants is a rapidly progressing field, actually. So please refer to latest scientific evaluation. Please. Yes, so this is just also introduction. I'm leading a research project under the Environment Research and Technology Development Fund in Japan from the Ministry of Environment, which is a comprehensive research focusing not only on climate change but also health, agriculture, and water cycle impact due to short-lived climate forces, and then proposing their optimal reduction pathway. This project aimed to contribute to international and domestic measures against both climate change and air pollution, including APCAP and CCAC. Okay, so this slide is a summary of my today's talk, which can be found in the APCAP policy brief I authored. It is very important to consider this very complicated and integrated relationship among short-lived climate forces for climate change, health impact, and crops. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Toshi. And I think we have before we go into a 5-minute break, we will have a short quiz to be facilitated by Dr. Zisman and Dana.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Let me just share my screen again. So, checking if everyone can see my screen. Okay, so I am now showing again the same Slido quiz. So again, requesting the participants to go back to slido.com, enter the code 412881 or scan the QR code, and we will be starting with the quiz for the second for the first talk. So the first question, again, requesting all participants to go to slido.com and answer the second quiz for Paul. So the first question is, which of the following explains some of the possible advantages of pursuing co-benefits? So the choices are, it can reduce the cost of mitigating climate change, it can motivate policymakers and politicians to take action on climate change, and it can bring climate finance to development needs, and all of the above. So again, requesting all participants to go to slido.com and answer the second poll. So currently, there are already around 21 participants accessing the poll. Okay, okay, so I think around 17 participants are already finished with answering. So I'm just waiting for more participants before we go through the responses. Okay, so more than half of the respondents present on the Slido website have already answered. So Dr. Eric, if you can go through the responses.
Hi. Yep. Thank you very much, Dana. So I'm going to give them the answer to this question. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I can't see the very bottom here, but it's looking good. The answer to this question is actually all of the above. So basically, by pursuing co-benefits, you can reduce the costs of mitigating climate change. We can help make a stronger argument for policymakers and politicians. We can also capture some climate finance from things like, as I mentioned, the CDM. And therefore, the answer is all of the above. I would suggest if you put just the first one or the second one, those are obviously important advantages, but all of the above is the correct answer for this one.
So majority of the participants got that correct. So
Yeah.
moving on to the next question. So which of the following is not an example of co-benefits? Reductions in air pollution from a climate policy, reductions in greenhouse gases from an air pollution policy, reduction in jobs from a climate policy, and lastly, improvements in water quality from climate policy. So showing the answers from our participants. Okay, so I'll go through, I'll go back. Okay, so Eric, if you could talk through this question.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dana. And yeah, so this was a bit of a trick question, but our audience is very astute. Basically, all of the first option and the second option are co-benefits, and the fourth option is co-benefits. But basically, we don't want to reduce jobs. And so this is actually what we call a co-cost sometimes, or a trade-off. And one of the things we might deal with a little bit later in our discussion, especially for city level policymakers, is there might be some trade-offs, there might be some co-costs, and then we might need to think about how we can minimize those trade-offs or co-costs, what types of other policies or other interventions we can make. For instance, if somebody is going to lose a job, how do we make sure that they can get a new job? For instance, if they lose a job from power plant closing down, how can we help them transition into working for renewable energy? And a lot of the responsibility for this falls on policymakers' shoulders. So we want to remove or reduce those co-costs, and I'm very happy to see 100% answering this question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. So we also have here a leaderboard just to show everyone, just to show the participants who are the top, those who got the top score. So actually it's time-based based on how the length of time you've answered all the questions. So congratulations, Key and Dave, for taking the top spot so far. And then these are the top 5. So thank you for joining the quiz. Okay, just checking if there are more questions here. So next, which of the following is not an SLCP? I'll just quickly go through this. So the participants answered CO2, 67%, and then 33% answered ozone. So the correct answer is CO2. So majority of the participants also got that correct. Okay, so it's showing the leaderboard for each question. So congratulations, Miss Joyce Christine Gambet. And then I think that's it for this quiz. So handing it back to Dang.
Thank you, Dana and Eric. I think we have time for just one quick question from the chat we received. Professor Toshi, checking if you are still online. So one of the participants wanted to ask if the sprinters model is now currently being applied in which occasion, and is it, for example, being applied in the Japanese government as part of the IPCC work? So that is the question from one of the participants. Thank you.
Yes. So actually the operation of PM 2.5 forecast is my actually voluntary activity daily actually. So but because the forecast quality is actually high, so a lot of media and apps mainly in Japan use my forecast result, PM 2.5 forecast result daily actually. Of course, the not only the public, but also the my research result have cited in the IPCC work and so on, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for responding. And so that concludes our session. We will go into a 5-minute break, and we will resume the session in 10:30 Manila time, 9:30 Bangkok, and 11:30 Tokyo. So see you all in a few minutes. Thank you.
Es una obligación política, ética, moral, con la sociedad, tomar decisiones serias, contundentes y dedicarle recursos a la lucha contra la contaminación. Los coches eran los protagonistas de los pueblos, de las villas, de las ciudades. Nosotros hemos cambiado ese modelo.
Era un caos circulatorio por la cantidad de vehículos que pasaban a cientos durante el día, las semanas, y ahora es lo que podéis ver, un remanso de tranquilidad y que ha traído una serie de consecuencias positivas.
So good afternoon. Checking if everyone is back in the room. I'm checking the chat. All right, so welcome back to our training on integrating short-lived climate pollutants into urban plans and initiatives. So for our next session, we would like to welcome Professor Nguyen Kim On from the Asian Institute of Technology to talk about the 25 clean air measures from the air pollution in Asia and the Pacific report, science-based solutions, talking from the air quality and climate benefit perspectives. So Professor Kim has over 40 years of training and experience in leading air quality related projects and activities throughout Asia. She has worked on over 55 regional collaboration projects to provide a better characterization of air pollution issues in Asian countries, and also a member of the science panel of the APCAP, and was a coordinating lead author of the UNEP Regional Assessment Report on Atmospheric Pollution in Asia and Pacific in 2019. So without further ado, Dr. Kim, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you, Dan. So good morning, everyone. Can I share my slide now? Please let me share my slide.
Okay, Shen, can you please?
It looks like disabled.
Yes, Professor Kim, can you try it again?
Yes, let me see. Okay, can I do it now? Okay,
And
you
we
see?
can see it now. Yes, thank you, Dr. Kim.
Okay, I show my slide, right? Oh, no. Let's go back to the first one. You can see it, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So my talk is about the 25 clean air measures from the report. We normally talk about clean air solution report, but full name is Air Pollution in Asia and the Pacific, science-based solution. And today my talk is more on air quality and climate co-benefit perspective. I am from the Asian Institute of Technology. You can call me Kim or Kim Oanh, right? Don't call me Nguyen. Okay, so the highlight of my talk is first I would like to introduce the report, okay, and focus a little bit more on 25 measures and talk about air quality and climate co-benefit if we could implement these 25 measures. So first, we have three very prominent atmospheric issues, all linked to the change in composition of the atmosphere. The first, we normally talk about ozone depleting substances. like CFC, causing ozone layer depletion, and that's why more UV, especially UVB, would reach Earth and then causing effects. So our colleagues talk about greenhouse gas and greenhouse effect, and especially Takemura-san very much highlights scientific and physical like basis of these greenhouse gases and short-lived climate pollutant that causing climate change. Our concern occurs this day and a lot in Asia is air pollution. And that because of air pollutant in the atmosphere and it deteriorates air quality. So this results in the effect on human health first. Air pollution results on health effect, climate change on the health effect, ozone layer depletion also cause health effects. So we have effect on water resource management, effect on ecosystem and crop, especially here showing the effect of air pollutant on crops, like ozone, effect on crops, sulfur dioxide effect on lettuce, so fluoride air pollutant effect on air pollutants, and ethylene effect on the early ripening of guava fruits here. So talking about the air pollution and climate, we normally talk about we actually think globally, we think about the climate, but we act locally. This is because of air pollution come from many sources. Okay, in Asian developing country, you can see traffic, you can see open burning, industry, cooking, so it's residential and commercial cooking. The emission actually in combination with meteorology, where normally we are worried about stagnant meteorology, it means that when pollutant cannot be mixed very well, and it's resulting in very high level of pollution, like this picture taken in Bangkok back in January 2019, and result on very unhealthy condition of the air quality. So our colleagues Eric and Takemura-san already talked about the short-lived and long-lived greenhouse gases and short-lived climate pollutants or short-lived climate forces. So this is basically why we call it short-lived and long-lived, and what is spatial distribution and lifetime of these species. First, gases like tropospheric ozone, it means ozone down here, ozone pollution, not it's so ozone layer. We want to protect it up there in the atmosphere, 35 kilometers. Tropospheric ozone is ground level ozone, that is air pollutants and also effect on crops. Okay, we talk about NOx, SOx, and volatile organic compounds. And for particles, we talk about different type of particles. So that we can detect composition like black carbon, sulfate, nitrate, ammonium, and organic carbon. So black carbon, as we mentioned by Takemura-san, it actually have a warming effect because it is soot particle. It's very dark. So in the atmosphere, it absorbs solar radiation and warming the atmosphere. While sulfate, nitrate, and organic particle actually cooling effect because they are white color and they reflect sunlight. But this is the direct ozone impact, but it interaction with cloud. So as Takemura-san showed you earlier, that it also have both warming and cooling effect. Okay? So for gases like ozone, it's actually strong greenhouse gases. So these actually present in the atmosphere for a few days or months. So during that short lifetime, they could not travel very far, and the regional effect is more regional effects, and just touching maybe hemisphere based on the meteorological condition. The gases like methane and F gas, FC, right? That from refrigeration, so that they're also short-lived because they live in the atmosphere for a few years to a decade, like methane is 12 years, for example. They're much shorter than CO2. So CO2 present in the atmosphere with lifetime more than 100 years and above. And during this time, it went mixed and it's a global pollutant, global effects. So talking about air pollution in Asia, first we must recognize that we have very intensive emission sources, come from traffic, come from residential combustion, biomass open burning, including the forest fire, and also agro residue open burning. We have solid waste open burning. And then for industry, big industry, we also have problem with coal combustion, coal-based and coal-based power plant. But we have a lot of small industry. We call it like craft village in Vietnam, for example, causing a lot of problem. So that emission actually will not control that well, the result in very high level of air pollution, especially in dry season, because we have very high seasonality. So very high level in dry season, but when it's wet season, like in Bangkok nowadays, it's very clean. So we don't worry about air pollution nowadays because it's rainy. So PM actually is PM 2.5, the fine particle. So that particle that deeply inhaled into our lungs is the most concern. And PM 2.5 include both primary particles like black carbon or dust from road dust, and secondary particles that form in the atmosphere from precursors like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide in the atmosphere. It reacted and forming like with the other species and forming ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate. That is also goes acid rain we talk about, but it is also a big composition, key composition of the particle in many urban areas of Asia, including, for example, Vietnam and Thailand. We don't have systematic report on the PM2.5 level, just static measurement, and a lot of that is by local sensor, so the data quality is still need to be actually still not of concern. Surface ozone, if we look at the ozone air quality in Hanoi, for example, Ho Chi Minh City or Bangkok, we see an increasing trend. And quite high level observed in suburban area. Suburban area is downwind of the urban area, and we can find very high ozone. And suburban urban area is a cropland, so that's why high ozone here actually cause a lot of problem with the crop and ecosystem impact. We have high level of indoor air pollution resulting mainly from the dirty fuel used for cooking and poor ventilation at home. So Asia also have a lot of transboundary pollution, like acid rain I mentioned earlier. It can travel thousands of kilometers away from the source. Asian ground clouds and region haze caused by forest fire, dust storm, etc. The impact on the human health and ecosystem and crop and climate are substantial. So here I recall Eric on the give you this figure about the PM2.5, ambient PM2.5 in Asia, mainly here. And you can see level in some places very dark. It's reaching almost 100 microgram per cubic meters. While the WHO guideline, the current guideline, the new guideline is in more strict. The current guideline is 10 microgram per cubic meters. So in 2015, the current et al. Mentioned study showed that ambient PM2.5 caused 4.2 million deaths, and about 60% of that deaths occurred in Asia and Southeast Asia. In 2019, for HIEI 2000 report, the SOGA report, right? The deaths due to PM2.5 in ambient air is 4.14. With another study, right? Plus 2.31 million of deaths from household PM2.5, and from ozone is 365,000 deaths. So talking about air quality and climate co-benefit for developing countries especially. So because in developing countries, we have very high level of air pollution with measurable effect, and that should justify the emission control efforts. And developing country or less developed country are more vulnerable to climate change. This is because of location, because of the infrastructure we have not resilient enough to cope. So if we can gain co-benefit, it's very, very good. It's very important here. So air pollution and climate foster like they have common sources. Okay, so for example, talk about the combustion emission from coal combustion, for example, it emits a lot of CO2. It also emits a lot of particles and toxic gases like sulfur dioxide. So that's why we can, if we actually realize this co-benefit strategy, they'll talk about co-control measure would be achieve a win and win. It's a win and win solution. It is important to integrate air quality and climate policy because first it's a benefit and second is actually air quality management or air quality policy in the region, even in developing country, are more mature than the climate policy. That's why if we can integrate, so it gets both benefit from air quality and climate management strategy. So as mentioned now, our earlier speakers, so we cannot only reduce short-lived climate pollutants, but then reduce short-lived climate pollutant should be done with greenhouse gas like CO2 stabilization. But if we reduce short-lived climate pollutant, it could be cost-effective short-term measure to achieve long-term goal for greenhouse gas stabilization. And here, again, a picture showing that when we tackle air quality and climate, we think of multi-pollutant and multi-effect approach. So this is air pollution, the emission of these, say, sulfur dioxide, ammonia, and nitrogen oxide. Actually, it's air pollutant. It's precursor for PM10 and PM2.5 in the atmosphere. And it actually also precursor for acid rain, acidification. And nitrogen actually compounds like eutrophication. And then all this is methane, NOx, and non-methane hydrocarbon, and CO. So actually, it's precursor for ozone. Okay? And this is greenhouse gases. We could talk about climate change. And we talk about urban air quality issues. So that is, we talk about multi-pollutant and multi-effect approach. In tackling this issue, so again, co-benefit. So with that, I talk about shortly about the air pollution and in Asia Pacific and the solution report. This is how the report look like, and you can download it online, right? And it released in 2019 by UNEP. The report as such aim to support efforts to reduce air pollution in the region. The region here, we mean Asian and the Pacific, by proposing cost-effective options suitable to the country in the region. So it's not anywhere, but it's for the country in the region. The key feature we talk about, first, status of air quality in Asian and in the Pacific. So in 2015, about 4 million people, or 92% of the population in the region, exposed to PM2.5 level above the WHO guideline values, but annual level is 10 micron per cubic meter, right? And it is important to reduce PM2.5 and surface ozone for the health, well-being of people, food production, environment, and climate. So further, right now in Asia and the Pacific, especially in developing countries, there are some form of air quality management program exists, but it may not be enough if we continue with the same thing, because we need further action to improve air quality. And what can be done? The report actually highlight and selected and recommend 25 measures. So today we talk more about 25 measures, and report also highlight how to achieve the benefit by proposing the close collaboration of regional, nation, urban, and rural authority, and its joint efforts and institution mechanism to address PM and ozone in urban areas and suburban areas. The collaborative region and international initiative for financial, technological, and capacity building support. So, wait hand. Oh, okay. I think Eric's presentation make my presentation much easier because he already mentioned about and explained about the three groups of the measures, Asian-wide application of convention measures. This is like so industrial emission standard. So we continue vehicle emission standard, inspection and maintenance of vehicles, the road dust emission control. This is already applied before 2015, and Asian-wide it means we apply it more. Okay. So next stage, so Asian specific measures. So this is talk about the ban of agro-residue open burning, ban of household solid waste open burning, etc. And the measure contributing to development goal is mainly aimed at methane emission reduction, like rice paddies and like coal mining, so oil and gas production. So this is for methane, right? And methane is greenhouse gas, and you can see later, methane is actually a precursor to form ozone, and ozone is air pollutants. So this is 25 measures which been from over like 2,000 control options that available worldwide. And 25 measures selected to deliver the greatest benefit for human health while contributing to development priority goals. So these 25 measures address the emission of primary particles. So those are directly emitted into the atmosphere, like road dust, I mentioned earlier, black carbon, and the precursor of particles, those actually reacted in the atmosphere to form secondary particles. So it's like volatile organic compounds that forming organic carbon particle, NOx and SOx, and ammonia, and we talk about ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate particle. Those are all actually in the PM fine particle range. It means PM 2.5. And we talk about ozone precursor that VOC and including methane here, NOx and CO that is reacted in the atmosphere in presence of sunlight forming ozone. It is estimated that if we implement those 25 measures, then we can achieve ambient air quality meeting WHO guidelines for 1 billion of people in Asia by 2030. So we can gain a lot of benefit for public health, economic development, and climate. So now a little bit the measure you can see in the report. So here I actually try to see to give you some idea why the measure would bring in co-benefit. For transport sector, so we focus on the on-road transport and international shipping and road dust. Okay, so these measures actually aim at reduction of combustion pollutants, and combustion pollutants include, for example, PMX, it means PM10, PM2.5, ultra-fine particles, okay, black carbon, organic carbon, heavy methane, both in gas and in particles. And it also have gases like CO, product of incomplete combustion. SOx is related to the sulfur in the fuel. NOx actually from the nitrogen in the fuel and in the air. VOC is product of incomplete combustion. And this is a precursor of PM and ozone as mentioned earlier. Combustion like burning, incomplete combustion. So we have a lot of semi-volatile organic compounds, including carcinogenic compound of PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. We have dioxin that is most toxic and emit a lot from solid waste open burning actually. So we have also from combustion, we have a lot of greenhouse gases. So like CO2, nitrogen dioxide, nitrous oxide, and then methane, and short-lived climate pollutant like black carbon. Black carbon is product of incomplete combustion. If you go into your kitchen that burn, say, burning fuel wood, and you try to touch the pot, you can see your finger turn black, that is black carbon. So we have organic carbon. So and VOC, NOx, and SOx. So this is actually the production of from combustion, right? Or combustion pollutants. Road dust is like for dust. Okay, for industry, we also have MF combustion pollutant, methane and VOC and HFC, F-gas. Okay, for residential combustion, we talk about combustion pollutant mainly. For the energy, like renewable energy and the improved energy efficiency and the mining. So this is energy actually related to combustion pollutant, while mining actually talk about the methane emission. So agriculture, like livestock manure, so it's ammonia. Fertilizer application, it's also ammonia. This is precursor of the secondary PM2.5, right? And crop residue open burning, again, combustion pollutants. Forest and peat fire, so combustion pollutant. Rice paddy and wastewater management is actually methane. The waste management is also methane, and waste management also provide would help to avoid open burning. So it also helps avoid some combustion pollutant. So these measures actually address this key pollutant, and this is the key measure addressing the most polluting, the key or the main emission sources in Asia and the Pacific. Okay, so this is brief about 25 measures. The name is here. It's not by number 1 and 2, but start with clean cooking. So it's like IPC, right? But it's not really strictly IPC. So you can see this is reduction in population exposure to PM2.5 in 2030, right? In 10 years more. So the darker color here is by the measure already implemented. And the next generation measure is the brighter color here, and the almost yellow color is like the potential development measure goal. So that. So look at here, you can see from clean cooking. So, clean cooking. So the convention measure right now, the already implemented have very little impact on the PM reduction. It means we don't do anything yet or we don't do enough or very little thing to reduce the PM2.5 from cooking activity. For the recent legislation like the biogas production, etc., so you can have improve a little bit, but it have a huge potential for improvement for the further for energy, renewable energy efficiency for the domestic combustion. So clean cooking has most potential for PM2.5 reduction for South Asia, about 18 milligram per cubic meter. For Southeast Asia, it's 9 milligram per cubic meter. And East Asia, we can achieve more than 7 milligram per microgram per cubic meters. So for the developed country, actually, the most effective measure actually livestock manure management. That is the linked to reduction of ammonia, because this measure already implemented widely in developed country. Okay, so that's why high income Asia actually can focus on livestock management to reduce the PM2.5. So talking about the benefits, first a benefit on air quality. I showed you earlier this picture that ambient PM2.5 in 2015, and we talk about that more than 90% of people in the region exposed to the level of PM2.5, more than 10 micrograms per cubic meter. So this is in 2030, but then that is under the current legislation. It means we can continue. We talk about baseline protection. It means continue what we are doing. So you can see the level of pollution is very high. So very high. Okay? It's not much reduced. But then if we reduce, if we implement that 25 measure, so we can see the level of pollution actually much lower than these two cases. But in the darker area here and in the large urban area, we still can see high level. That is high level in megacity and in area with high dust emission in the desert area. So this is impact on air quality. So to see how this measure link to that impact. So this is the 2015 and this is 2030 by baseline. So then this show that this amount, if we don't do anything, just baseline, it means just continue what we are doing. So the population exposure, it means the population weighted PM2.5 would be more than 60, right? And the amount here is already avoided by the measure that already in place in 2015, and we would continue. Okay? And if after 2015 we continue to reduce emission of NOx and SOx as stationary sources, we can reduce this much PM2.5. So next generation, it means next stage, a measure like I mentioned already here, could avoid this much, right? Okay, and one of that is not flying here. This part is we actually continue to do the same nationwide. Some country apply, but now we apply more country. And one bar missing here. So then potential next measure is here. Okay, this amount. And FDG measure, so can avoid this much. So if we do all these 25 measures, this must remain. The population weighted PM2.5 in the region is still a little bit above 20 micrograms per cubic meter. And that comes from the remaining anthropogenic sources, and this part is from natural sources like soil dirt, forest fire. So in terms of the emission of greenhouse gases, we can see here that again, this is the measure, right? Now the post 2015 legislation related to 2015. So if we do the same, continue, so the climate forcer would increase, right? CO2 increase, methane increase, but black carbon reduce, okay? Because it's getting cleaner. So convention measure related to 2030 baseline. So then we cannot reduce any greenhouse gas here, but black carbon emission reduce. The next stage measure related to 2013 baseline. So we got CO2 emission not change much because this measure not aiming at CO2, but it aim at the measure for reduce methane and reduce black carbon. Now, if we include also development priority measure, so the measure aim at methane reduction, so we can also see reduction of say CO2, methane, and black carbon. So in terms of temperatures, so the GIS model also try to project temperature change. Okay, if this is a baseline, no change. So if we have convention measures to implement it, so by 2050, right? 50, 30 more years, so we can see temperature change. In the next stage measure, temperature also increase. But if we include all the measures with the development measures, okay, plus, so we can avoid the warming by almost 1/3 degree, 0.31 degree by 2050. So in terms of spatial distribution, the GIS model also projected, and you can see most, if we implement that 25 measures, so the temperature actually decrease in most of places in Asia. In some places, temperature is still increased, right? But then most of places, temperature is reduced. So this is to realize that we see that 25 measures proposed with 25 clean air measures identified by the report could bring in the benefit for air quality and climate in terms of temperature, avoid temperature increase here. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. We don't have time for question and answer, but if you have further clarifications, please feel free to type in the chat. I would like to call on our next speaker. So our next speaker is Ms. Precious Benjamin, the Capacity Development Officer of Clean Air Asia. Precious oversees the strategic planning and project implementation of Cleaner Asia's work in cities, including the development and implementation of science-based clean air action plans. Precious was part of the team who pioneered the Cities for Clean Air certification, a Cleaner Asia initiative which aims to support and recognize cities doing work on air quality. So Precious, handing over to you for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dang, and very honored to be able to speak alongside our esteemed experts for this training. So I will be speaking about assessing co-benefits and identifying solutions. Since we've heard about the basics of SLCPs and co-benefits, as well as the 25 clean air measures that address air quality, health, climate, and other development goals. So the next step is to use tools that will help us determine the most appropriate solutions that we can use or that we can take on to be able to achieve the co-benefits that we want for our city. Earlier in Dr. Kim's presentation, she shared during the latter part some of the expected emission reductions from the 25 clean air measures, and a type of these tool was used to generate those projections. So my presentation is designed to enable us to understand better the use of emissions inventory in baselining emissions and identifying priority emission sources to target, and also to learn about examples of co-benefits tools and how these were applied in cities or countries. So jumping right into examples of co-benefits tools, the selection of tools depends on the need of the city. So it depends on the sector or the intervention that the city is looking at, and also the benefits that it wants to model or to estimate for those specific interventions or projects. So for example, the transport interventions evaluation model for projects or team, which I'll be talking later about here in my presentation, and the international vehicle emissions or the IVE are specific for transport interventions, and they're able to show benefits of these interventions in terms of air pollution emission reductions, GHG emission reductions, savings in time and fuel, as well as accident reductions, specifically the three for the team model. There are also other tools that are more general. So for example, the Ben map, which is developed by USEPA, is more general in terms of modeling the diseases and the incidences of diseases and deaths that are linked to air pollution, and using that baseline, it's also able to show the benefits or the reduction in terms of those diseases and deaths once air quality improvements are in place for the city. For more information on co-benefits tools, can go to the sites that are flashed here on the screen, which provide more information on co-benefits and also lists the different types of tools that you can use for your city. For my first case study, I'll be sharing the experience of conducting an emissions inventory in Santa Rosa City, which is a city in the Philippines. An emissions inventory is a comprehensive listing by sources of air pollutant and also GHG and SLCP emissions within a specific geographic area, like a city or a country, and covering a specific time period. The emissions are computed using what is called an emission factor, which can be generated by researches or studies, or this can also be generated by actual measurements from the emissions, and activity data, which is usually related to the amount of fuel consumed for the different sources of emissions. The emissions inventory for Santa Rosa was conducted from 2019 to 2020, and it used activity data for 2019. So it was a multi-stakeholder collaborative effort led by the city government and represented by the Santa Rosa City Clean Air Core Team, which is an interagency group created through an executive order issued by the mayor. And this Clean Air Core Team was led by the city's City Environment and Natural Resources Office. The team was also comprised of members of the National Center for Transportation Studies as the experts for the transport sources and Cleaner Asia. The project was also co-financed by the city government and one of its private sector partners, Mitsubishi Motors Philippines Corporation. The Cleaner Core team was heavily involved in the activity, and they were part of the data collection and data cleaning, and there were also participants in the capacity building efforts of the project. So the scope of the emissions inventory included criteria pollutants, greenhouse gases, and SLCPs, and this was designed so to ensure that the city has a good foundation for having an integrated air quality and climate action moving forward. The project consisted of conducting the actual EI, so the data collection, data cleaning, QA/QC, and emissions estimation. And then each step was had a corresponding capacity building or training workshop for the Clean Air Core team, and of course, documentation and report preparation to document the methodology and also the results of the inventory. So shown here are some of the results from the inventory. So the graph in the upper left portion of the slide shows the percent share of emissions from the three major source categories, which are area, point, and mobile sources. Mobile sources would be road vehicles. Point sources would be industries and manufacturing facilities operating within the city. And then area sources are comprised of activities within residential and small commercial establishments like cooking and burning. And here, as marked by the gray shaded parts, mobile sources comprise or are dominant source for most of the pollutants that are produced within the city. We also show a few graphs for specific pollutants. So for black carbon, again, we see mobile sources contributing to almost 70% of emissions. And then for carbon dioxide emissions, on the other hand, point sources or the industries and manufacturing facilities are the dominant source, contributing 62%. Looking more specifically at the black carbon emissions for mobile sources to determine which type of vehicles are contributing to emissions. So for example, for black carbon, we see here that jeepneys are a dominant source of black carbon emissions within the city, and then followed by cars, trucks, and light goods vehicles. And the dominance of jeepneys in terms of black carbon emissions is also mirrored by results of other studies performed in Metro Manila on black carbon emissions and road vehicle activity. And then we also generated spatial maps for the emissions to see which areas generated the highest emissions. So these contributions per source and also per area will help the city in prioritizing what interventions and which areas to prioritize when it now carries its cleaner and climate action plan. So the emissions inventory was informed the development of the cleaner and climate action plan and also the prioritization of the measures. So part of the plan development was to identify the dominant pollution source for each pollutant. And although we note that mobile sources are the dominant source for most of the pollutants, it also shows here the importance of looking at point sources. And just also to note that the plan, although it does espouse prioritization of dominant sources to maximize the city's resources, it also looks at interventions for all existing sources within the city, including area sources. So in terms of prioritization, transport-related measures are being looked at, and specific to the city's context, the strategies that are applicable would be the improvement of inspection and maintenance of vehicles through the vehicle testing and apprehension, promotion of electric vehicle use, probably starting within city government and corporate fleets, and the promotion of public and active transport. So these measures, alongside the other measures that are appropriate for the city, are embedded in the city's Clean Air and Climate Action Plan. Then we also had the opportunity to use some of the activity data for doing a co-benefits analysis. And this was performed by our partners from IHS. And we were able to show the emissions from business as usual scenarios and from implementing measures on promoting active transport and improving inspection and maintenance from 2020 to 2030. And a few scenarios were used in this modeling. And one of the results, one of the key findings showed that it's important to implement jointly these interventions to maximize emission reduction and the use of the city's resources. So currently, the Clean Air and Climate Action Plan is with the city government and managed by the City Environment and Natural Resources Office. And that office is also facilitating discussions with other city departments to inform the city's way forward. I will go now to the next case study on applying TEAM for the Harbin Bus Priority Corridor project. So TEAM, or Transport Emissions Evaluation Models for Projects, is a tool that is Excel-based, and this is free for download, and it can be used to predict the benefits of transport projects in terms of emission reductions for CO2, for PM, and for NOx, and then savings in terms of fuel, time, and cost. So it can be used for a variety of transport projects, including bikeway projects and bike sharing schemes, BRT, LRT, MRT, and railway projects, development of pedestrian facility improvement, of pedestrian facilities to be able to promote walking and also roads project. So the graph shows that what TEAM does, as with other tools, is to provide scenarios for business as usual and for different interventions, and modeling and generating emissions and also the other benefits for these different scenarios will help facilitate reasonable direction for action and also help cities to evaluate their options. So the TEAM application for the Harbin project is under the Cold Weather Smart Public Transportation System project. And the TEAM was used to be able to assess potential reductions in air pollutants and CO2 emissions from the bus priority corridor component of the Harbin BRT project. So in terms of using TEAM, input data consider the routes or the routes of the bus priority corridors and also the bus lines and stops to be able to generate the vehicle kilometer traveled, and other activity data needed for the modeling. So the results of the TEAM application, among others, show the total emissions for PM, for NOx, and for CO2 for business as usual, which would be if there was no BRT project, and the total emission for the project scenario, which would be if the BRT was implemented. The emissions for the project scenario considered emissions from the construction of the BRT line, its operation, and also resulting emissions from motorized vehicles within the identified scope of the project. The modeling showed that there is a large emission reduction potential for the project, so as much as 65.4 reduction estimated for PM and 50% for CO2. And then the graphs on the right show the projected emissions for the different vehicle types if there was no BRT project or business as usual. And then the green dotted line shows the emissions for implementing the BRT project. So, just to go back. So the TEAM application was useful in validating the importance of the project in quantifying the costs and the benefits associated with the project to be able to ensure or to also assure decision makers and city officials that undertaking a project is very much worth it. So the third case study is on applying another type of tool for Bangladesh, which is called the LEAP IBC, or the Long Range Energy Alternatives Planning and Integrated Benefits Calculator. So most of the tools have very long names. And LEAP IBC in this instance helps countries to be able to characterize their national emissions. And it covers greenhouse gases, SLCPs, and air pollutants. And similar with other types of tools, so they're able to explore different emission reduction scenarios and calculate the benefits from these. And one of the goals of developing this tool was to inform nationally appropriate actions for countries in terms of climate, air quality, and SLCPs. So for Bangladesh, application of the LEAP IBC was part of developing its SLCP National Action Plan. And this was actually one of the, it formed the foundation for the plan in terms of developing an emissions inventory as baseline for emissions within the country, and then using that data to be able to estimate future projections for business as usual and intervention scenarios. And then the information was used to identify priority sources to reduce SLCPs and also the corresponding mitigation measures for these sources. And then finally, the measures were then were taken forward and detailed into key implementation actions as part of planning for operationalization of the plan. This was facilitated by the Department of Environment together with other national stakeholders. So here are the results of some of the results of the LEAP IBC application for Bangladesh. The graph here in the upper left shows the contributions of different source sectors for black carbon and methane. And here they are able to clearly see that there is a dominant contribution from use of traditional cook stoves for black carbon. And then on the other hand, wastewater activities, and then together with flooded rice cultivation activities contribute to methane. And so these data were important in identifying the priority sources for Bangladesh. And then the tool was also able to model estimated emissions for black carbon and methane from 2010 to 2040 for business as usual scenarios, as shown here. And then finally also help them evaluate different intervention scenarios. So under the plan, two major policy scenarios were considered. Scenario one, which is the implementation of interventions using existing regulations, programs, and technologies within the country. And then policy scenario two is more ambitious because it will now allow uptake of interventions that are not currently supported by existing technologies and also existing regulations within the country. So here we can see that, of course, as expected, there is a greater emission reduction expected for the more ambitious policy scenario. So the National Action Planning was able to identify mitigation measures and also the priority sources, and was also able to estimate that if it was fully implemented, black carbon emissions would be reduced by 40% in 2030, and then methane by 17%. And then the table is a sample of the different key implementation actions that were identified in the National Action Plan for each measure. So this is my last slide. Yes, to emphasize that the use of tools is indeed very important in adopting a co-benefits approach. And but it's even more important to make sure that the results of these modeling, of these analysis, are again used and communicated to key policymakers and decision makers, and also all stakeholders, so that they would really be able to inform our policies and actions that we will undertake to be able to achieve the benefits that we want for our cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Precious. I think we have some time for a short quiz. So, Dana?
Okay, thank you, Dang. So let me just share my screen again. So requesting the participants to access the poll again through the same link that was shared via chat. So we can go through the two quizzes. So I'll just go quickly over for the interest of time. So the first quiz was on Dr. Kim's presentation. So in Asia, high levels in air pollution are observed in urban areas, and PM 2.5 is the pollutant of most concern in the region. So majority answered true, which is the correct answer. The second question is, the 25 clean air measure address the emission of particulate matter and its precursors only. So the correct answer is false. It also addresses surface ozone, if you remember from the presentation of Dr. Kim. And then the last one, which of the following categories and statements is incorrectly matched? So there are 6 statements, 2 statements each for each category. So just to quickly go over this, convention emission controls is currently being implemented in Asia, and also it will protect people exposed to indoor air pollution for the next stage air quality measures. These are not yet widely applied, and they address other remaining priority emission sources. And for measures contributing to development priority goals, they are closely related to energy or agricultural policies or urban management. So the correct answer here, which is incorrectly matched, is actually letter B. So will protect people exposed to indoor air pollution. And then we can go through the next quiz, which is based on Ms. Benjamin's presentation. So Precious, if you could go through each question. So for the first question, requesting again all participants to access it's in the same link and you can just answer. So around 3 participants, 4 participants, okay, many are answering. So just a few more seconds. Okay, so majority of the respondents who are accessing the link have answered. So Precious, I'll be flashing the answers and the responses.
So for the first question, which of the following provides information on emissions of air pollutants and GHG per source type within a given geographic area and time period? So this is what is called an emissions inventory.
So for the second question.
So the second question, so among the different co-benefits tools presented, which of them predicts the benefits of transport projects or intervention in terms of CO2 emission reduction, air pollutant emissions, fuel savings, and others? So this one specifically focusing on transport, which I realize is here in the slide also. Okay, so most of the participants got it right. So it's the team tool which was used for the Harbin project in the presentation earlier.
Okay, and then the last question, I think.
And then finally, so how can co-benefits or the use of co-benefits tool inform decision and policy making? So it can quantify the benefits of an air quality or climate intervention. It can compare business as usual scenarios and intervention scenarios to show alternate options towards achieving a goal, or it can generate infographics that can be used for communicating to the public. And then a fourth option can be A and B. So majority of our participants got it right. It's so we can quantify the benefits and also compare business as usual and intervention scenarios. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to Dang. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana and Precious. So I think we can have a 5-minute break and into our last, but of course, definitely not the least session, wherein we will look at 3 city case studies demonstrating the application of co-benefits quantification to strengthen policies and institutions to implement air quality and climate action. So see you after 5 minutes. And yes, we hope you hang in there for our last session. Thank you.
Dentro de 20 años yo estoy segura de que esta provincia, todas sus ciudades, villas y pueblos, tendrán grandes espacios urbanos libres de vehículos, donde haya espacios para poder convivir, para poder socializarnos, respirando aire puro y aire limpio. Luchar contra la contaminación tiene que ser la mayor prioridad de todas las administraciones públicas. Y no lo es desde la palabra, lo es desde la acción.
그 미세먼지는 이제 신생아부터 노년층에 이르기까지 전 세대에 걸쳐서 건강을 위협하는 심각한 요인으로 작용하고 있습니다.
사실 그 재래시장은 오픈되어 있는 마켓이라서 폭염, 한파, 미세먼지가 있을 때는 고객이 현저하게 줄거든요. 근데 그런 것을 이게 환경적인 문제로 내가 영업에 수익이 달라지는구나라는 생각까지 인식을 못하다가 저희 에너지 활동가들의 이런 그래서 교육이나 홍보에 의해서 그런 내용들을 들으시고 거기에 동의를 하시면서 에너지 활동에 참여를 하게 됐고요. 수십 킬로와트씩 수백 킬로와트씩 설치할 수 있는 면적이 없잖아요. 그러니까 이제 흩어져 있는 옥상에 뭐 10kg, 20kg, 30kg 이렇게 설치를 하고 이들을 모아서 큰 규모로 만들어서 전력시장에 판매하는 이제 가상발전소라고 얘기하고 VPP 그리고 이거를 전력 중계라고도 얘기를 해요.
미래 그리고 전통과 과거가 동시에 공존하는 도시입니다. 서울이 브리드 라이프의 일원으로서 함께 이런 활동을 전개하는 것에 대해서 아주 자랑스럽게 생각하고 있습니다.
Air pollution is a critical challenger to the health of people in Bengaluru. Most of our vehicular traffic consists of two-wheelers, and people are directly exposed to these dangerous fumes.
The kids in our house are always falling ill. Either my daughter is ill for a week or my son is ill for a week. My son has been having asthma issues because of the bad air quality.
Because I suffered a lot with the two-wheeler ride and because of the pollution, I just chose electric car. To choose an electric car is a conscious decision, mainly because that doesn't pollute the air. I also feel a sense of satisfaction that I am contributing to the betterment of the city.
All of the city's stakeholders, whether it is public representatives, with the bureaucrats, the civil society, we will all work towards ensuring that our city gets a better quality of air to address these problems at the very root level. If you measure the impact that has taken place in the city because of electric buses, the city's carbon footprint is lesser, and I'm confident that it will take us to a time and space where the city's air quality will be much better than what it is today.
I'm checking if everyone is back. So we are down to our last session, and I would like to welcome Mr. Merlin Lau, Senior Program Manager at ICLE East Asia, who has years of experience working for the Environmental Protection Bureau of Macau, SAR, during which he was dedicated in the first 10-year environmental planning of the city and its compliance on international environmental conventions. And he has also developed his expertise on GHG accounting and management by working with Reset Carbon in Hong Kong SAR, with other institutes and also with other institutes in the UK. So without further ado, Merlin, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you, Dan. I just want to make sure people can hear me.
Yes, clearly.
And I will try to share my screen as well. Can you see this? Just do full screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for Dan's introduction, and thank you everyone for staying until the last section. So Dan introduced me about my background, but actually there's more about that. Currently, I'm working at ICLE. So for some of you that you may not know, ICLE is actually a different type of nonprofit organization. It's a city network. So our members are local governments in the world that work together on urban sustainability issues and also environmental issues. I am sitting in Seoul of the East Asia Secretariat for the moment. So I'm personally more familiar with the cases in China, Korea, Japan, and also Mongolia. But we also have a very strong office in India for South Asia and also Philippines for for the Southeast Asia. So I mean, for this section, this would be a little bit different. I actually stayed for the whole section. And just now, our fellow professors and also Eric, they actually touch upon very much about the technical context and the causal relationship, etc. about this. And just now, presentation talk about the tools in how it is being used. My presentation would be a little bit different since we work with the city network. The idea is to let our fellow practitioners and also policymakers know practically how city cases, like city government as a whole, would approach the issue. And today, I will just briefly share three direct cases that are of our member and project cities that we work with, including California, Seoul in South Korea, and also Beijing in China. Like what I'm going to talk about is more about their institutional framework, as a whole of a government, how they think, and also their latest planning and how a master plan can synergize the issue of air quality and co-benefits together, which I think could be of relevance for some of the policymakers here. Very unfortunately, we used to bring cities to participant officials to some of these places to have a direct learning experience. But because of COVID, I will share some of the findings online this time, and I hope in the future some of the cities can visit each other for peer learning. I will first go with California, which I will talk about the institutional arrangement, its carbon neutrality scenarios, and how it plan for its reduction strategy. So I remember one of the participants asked about the case at provincial level. I think it's related to Vietnam, and Eric he replied, California is actually one of the good example because it's at the state level. So my sharing here would be a little bit relevant on this. First would be about the background. Some of you may know or may not know, actually California, apart from like this like tech industry and other things is also known to have like severe wildfire. This figure actually, even though it talks about until 2020, but it's already outdated. If you read the news, and I think this year they have the worst wildfire like in the history of California in terms of the scale and also losses. That brings, I mean, that clearly reflects is an like an outcome or impact from climate change, and also the burning create a secondary impact to air pollution in surrounding areas. As you can see, I mean, in the graph, like, so the numbers speak the truth. So California has an emergency fund, and the emergency fund expenses actually grow significantly for the last 10 years compared to the past, like to support damage and also casualty related to the wildfire. So the graph is just telling people that, I mean, financially is also a very important issue. What I want to tell now is about its institutional arrangement in California. It's a little bit interesting compared to maybe some of the cities here, because it's at the state level. So they have a governor's office, and for issue related to environment, they will have the California Environmental Protection Agency, and then at above you see some as a coordination with the national part that I will skip. So what you see here quite stand out is that some of you may know they have a California Air Resources Board. We call it CARB. I think it's established quite a long time ago. When it was established, it was targeting very much on air pollution issue. And it has been known as one of the most experienced government departments like subnational level to deal with air pollution. So I suggest if you have time, you can check out their work. What I'm going to say is that I think about like some 15 years ago, basically California has eliminated a lot of the air pollution issue, and the climate issue come into the space. So when it comes into the space, is that like the government actually established a climate action team, and then with an advisory body, but they are asking the California Air Resources Board to be the coordinator. That means they, in the very beginning, they already see it as a very relevant issue between air quality and climate. So we see this is a very important part in mainstreaming California's work like related to climate and environmental issue. As a side issue, and I think like maybe it's also good for information to know that the California Air Resources Board, they actually asked for the establishment of environmental justice advisory committees to make sure all their like action plan and policy making will be like socially like justified and approved. Then I will give you like two practical example how it is happening in California right now. This one is really new. So as you know, it as you can see, it's launched like October 2020. So it's talking about California's carbon neutrality direction. At the global level, many countries like pledge 2050 to carbon neutrality, but California is actually moving forward faster, and they want to do it by 2045. How they are going to do it? Actually, they work together with consultancy and do a scenario mapping. I'll briefly tell this table because there's so many works here. So basically, they are trying to really set scenarios. I think some of the technicians here would know, and they call it like high carbon dioxide removal scenario, a balance, and also like a very ambitious zero carbon energy scenario, and then something in between. They call it a balance scenario. Basically, if we talk about it in the simple words, they are changing some of the numbers in scenarios when they try to plan the ultimate scenario. So essentially, I think the strategy here we see is like very much about electrification of the industry, transport, building, etc. And it's one of the main goals to take reference if our fellow cities want to consider long-term goals towards climate neutrality. And if you see the left column, they talk about, they differentiate this into fields, primary energy consumption, building sector, transportation sector, like industry, agriculture, and I just now touch upon electricity, and also some like maybe high greenhouse global warming potential and non-combustion maybe gases. So what we are trying to say here is that they are looking into two things. Just now mentioned is like electrification, and secondly is to really phase out the fossil fuels by 2045, even for the gas grid, for the zero carbon energy scenario. And I will show a simple diagram, and it's also for our practitioners here. As you can see, a lot of the efforts are actually put into the transportation sector. Just now we heard about questions related to Jakarta. And the thing is to make sure the heating and also the mobility, like the vehicles, they will be electrified. And a lot of the happenings will be happening between 2030 to 2035. And then like when it goes all the way to the goal of getting neutrality by 2045, it will go into a lot of about fully industrial decarbonization, and also like a changing of the waste pattern, and electricity is 100% zero carbon generated. So the longer term is basically a lot about the radical implementation change of the people's mind, and also technology change, which are more difficult. That's why it happened later. But if you see some of the low hanging fruit about providing heating and also the like electricity to vehicles is something we can see already achievable at the moment to lead to the long-term target. So today's topic is about co-benefit, or sometimes we talk about like how when we try to implement a carbon neutrality scenario, it can cover like other areas. Just now we touched upon a lot about air quality. So for fuel combustion, it's definitely the case. If you move like a zero carbon energy scenario, you would have a lowest risk of fossil fuel combustion, which in the report, they actually related to air quality and health, but they use some parameter like the fuel combustion change to reflect how health and air quality will be positively impacted if you go into a more ambitious scenario, which is the same that for climate change risk, like if you do this, and how like issues for wildfires that I mentioned just now will be very much related. And lastly, a point, I wouldn't go into details because the report is quite detailed about that. The issue is that when we implement a long-term strategy, so there are two things we need to consider. I just now mentioned whether technology will be readily adopted, which is very difficult. Some of the like high level carbon dioxide reduction potential like CCS is very expensive to do. So whether it's possible is one thing, is a risk. And secondly, about people's mindset, whether they will be changed, like even though I make law, and will people be buying new vehicle at an appropriate speed, electric vehicles. So these are actually considered in such kind of scenario mapping when they do the carbon neutrality planning and consider the co-benefits. So I would suggest like some of you also can look into that report for how they actually plan it. And before the carbon neutrality, they actually also thought about SLCP. Just now our professors already touched upon the technical bit, what I'm going to show you here is like what they actually would do in terms of reaching their target. As you can see, they are setting a target for black carbon, methane, and HFC at about like 40 to 50% reduction compared to business as usual scenario. So business as usual scenario is something worth more discussion because it's a forecast if you haven't done any effort to do reduction. As I said, California has been really advanced in terms of air quality issue. So they all, when they set a business as usual scenario, they already expected black carbon will be reduced. For example, I changed my vehicle already, like electrify at a faster speed. For methane, it's more or less the no change. Maybe the waste pattern would be the same. And for HFC would be significantly increased. I think it's easy to explain because of like the heating and you need air conditioning, and a lot of air conditioning are actually related to this high green global warming potential refrigerant. So they are expecting an increase. But so they are trying to consider a reduction target based on a business as usual scenario to come up as a 50% target. Now we briefly see what they do because I think Dr. Kim's like a presentation already touched upon the 25 solutions in Asia. Of course, California is not in Asia, but you can see that when it tried to upload the SLCP issue, what are the actual practices that would be feasible. The first, you can see black carbon. So they focus a lot on like clean energy goals, like maybe renewable energy supply. And I think to some extent will be related to gas as well. And also about household burning, like at home you have a fireplace and also wood stove, how that would be replaced. This may not be that much with relevant into the Southeast or South Asian country, but if we change the term to boiler, then it will be the same implication that if you want to reduce black carbon, then you need to see the individual boiler changes. And I think I will touch upon that in the Beijing's case a little bit later. And then methane. So we know that methane sources mainly come from agricultural, like livestock, and also landfilling. So as we can see from the figure, we know, the most potential for California to reduce is about the dairy and also livestock industry in terms of like their fermentation, etc., to reduce the methane like emission. And the others are relatively minor in terms of, for example, gas leakage from the oil and gas sector, and also landfilling, which is just a fraction of the dairy industry, which is really big in California. And then lastly, HFC, is a very challenging issue, and I think it's way more relevant to our countries in Asia because of the warming impact. So you see what they're trying hard to do is, should be related to the Montreal Protocol that globally has come to an agreement to phase out HFC. And it's a really good effort before the Paris Agreement to talk about how we actually save the ozone. So it's a good international convention to help keep some of the high GWP HFCs going down and phase out. And then they also look into additional prohibition, like regulation on sales, and also of the refrigerants as well as the equipment in terms of looking into HFC's reduction. So I personally think HFC's reduction will be, the discussion will be very relevant in the future for some of our cities attending to date. I will skip this slide because we already touched upon all these co-benefits like health, jobs, investment. So I'm not going to repeat this. Secondly, I want to talk about the city of Seoul from South Korea, where I am based, and I personally work very closely with Seoul metropolitan government. So I have some more insight on that. Like for Seoul's case, what I want to highlight maybe mainly two. Like one is how institutional framework can facilitate the action plan processes, and also its latest carbon neutrality strategy, which is also very new, that take into account of other environmental issues, especially air quality, that the president announced it as I think national disaster like 2 years ago because of the heavily polluted situation in the cities. So first thing first, so why I want to share about the case of Seoul, because they actually have a division, not a division, they call it headquarter, the climate and environment headquarter. Is higher than the bureau level. Basically, it's a collection of bureau that work on the issue of climate and environment. And there's a legal basis, vision, objective, and the areas clearly stated for the mandate of this headquarter. And as you can see, for example, in the objective part, they are trying to connect clean air and carbon neutrality together as a main objective of the headquarter. That means their people can work all the subjects together rather than separately between departments. So this graph, you can see a simplified structure of this climate and environment headquarter. What I wanted to point out that they have three particular divisions. I mean, the other divisions are also very relevant, but I wanted to say three. They have the air quality division that's mainly responsible for air quality policy and monitoring, as well as the framing of the AQM, air quality management framework. And then they have the climate change response divisions that focus a lot on the technical bit of the greenhouse gas emission reduction calculation, etc., and also any implementation related to climate change. And then they have even like a more coordinated department. It's called the Environmental Policy Division that I work very much with. So this, if you see the name, they will be responsible just for environmental policy. But in reality, the head of this division is also leading the head. I mean, it's also responsible for the climate change division. So essentially, this division will be thinking very much from the angle how to reduce greenhouse gas emission. That's the primary goal. And then the environmental policy division will interpret further and help them to address more mandate that I just touched upon in the last slide about the objective through the joint planning processes. And I will show you the example from the Seoul 2050 greenhouse gas reduction plan as an example, then you can better understand this. So this graph is also really new. I think you may not be able to find it online. It's one of the first-hand information from Seoul. So by the end of last year, it announces its greenhouse gas reduction plan. But before that, actually, it went through a one whole year process before announcing this. And I want to share how they do it so that some of our cities can take reference to. So first you will see, then they will have a vertical integration that connect to the national government, because the national government also established, I think they call it NCCA at that time, the National Climate Change and Committee. But in another thing, because Seoul as a capital, so it has more direct connection on this topic. And I would like maybe later, if we get a chance, I can talk more about vertical integration. and I think would be similar to the governance structure in some of the countries in South and Southeast Asia. And then what they actually do is the lower part of the graphic, and they have like just now I mentioned the intergovernmental coordination between the divisions, and then they have a climate action forum, and oh, I skipped this, and then they have this governance structure, and I will maybe explain it into a 4 component that you can take reference when your city want to plan your actions related to that. So the very first one is the climate action forum. Then, which is, I go back to the slide, is the left bottom. Like what it is mainly for, is mainly to put in the technical input from the like a science institute and then do consultation. So it's similar to our professor's presentation before. So the beginning, the science institution of the city, they will be formulating the suggestion, and they have members from different groups, and then they set up like technical committees on policy, building, transportation, and waste, and basically hold a lot of like discussion sections to formulate their action draft suggestion to the government. So as you can see, they formulate the 28 policy, 12 strategy in 4 main sectors, similar to California's case, like building, transportation, waste, and energy. So you see like this climate action forum is about the technical part of input, and they will provide this feedback directly to the climate crisis task force that I will mention in the end. The second action is about have an open consultation with the governance group. So when we say governance group, it is more like external stakeholders, like related to the citizen, how they think, and also energy policy committee, because we know that the issue would be very related to energy on climate change and also SLCPs, etc. So Seoul is known to be having a lot of these committee bodies. They are not part of the government, but they would be invited to give consultation regularly. I think this structure is common in some countries, but not like in all countries. And then they carry out consultation section. And one particular point I want to add, this committee, they also have a mandate not just to talk about the technical bit, but also want to talk about how this policy would be related to the economy of the city. Like if I do electrification of transportation sector, am I bringing new jobs to people, or am I trying to add burden to people who are suffering from COVID at the moment? So this governance group provide additional insight, like from external people, how they think in terms of like the policies relationship with economy, which a lot of practitioners always overlook. And the third part is about Seoul Citizen Survey. I think Eric mentioned a little bit in the beginning about Seoul's practice, and Seoul like very much focused on people's participation. So I remember in the last mayor, they actually, when they talk about air quality issue, they open a 3,000 live venue for people to sit together and have discussion with the mayor. Such kind of practice to ensure that people and their citizens are part of the discussion of the processes. So as you can see for this neutrality planning, they have organized 2 times like an online survey to their citizens to ask about their perspective on climate change, and secondly about the policy views. And finally, all this would put together into the climate crisis task force that I show you in the original graph here, that they are the central body, even though they have the climate and environment headquarters, but people, the like government officials, they are busy with everything. So they have to establish a separate task force to ensure that there's regular discussion focusing on the Green New Deal policy and carbon neutrality targets, bringing into the knowledge from different division governments or division departments. And this is how Seoul actually made its reduction plan. So it's not just like ask a scientific institute and give me a plan, but they have actually spent more time to do consultation than making the plan itself. And then finally, I want to like speak about Beijing. Beijing's case would be very relevant. Why I pick it here, because as some of you may know, China is known for its air pollution, especially a few years ago, I think from 2013. And that time, the capitals and around the cities are one of the most polluted in the world. But Beijing has done a lot of like effort. And I personally think from the technical perspective, they integrate a lot of actions rapidly. And then the air pollution has dramatically like reduced. And at the same time, also bringing climate benefit that I'm going to show you with this example. First thing first is about the evidence. So as you can see, sorry, this is Chinese there, but green is like excellent, like yellow is good, and then orange is lightly polluted, and then moderately polluted, heavy polluted, and severely polluted. I'm not going to talk about the standard here, but this is the standard that Beijing is using. So I'm comparing within Beijing situation. Anyway, you can see the color change. It's basically improving air quality every year by actual monitoring data. And at the same time, with the same model, we monitor the result. The annual carbon dioxide emissions in Beijing is linearly reducing. So the actions Beijing has taken, whether or not they consider from the co-control perspective, the actual outcome is like both the air pollutants and also greenhouse gas pollutants are reduced in the last maybe 7 years. So let me come into what actually they did in order for this, let's say, they call it miracle sometime to happen. So if you see the key air pollutants, it includes, for example, SOx like sulfur dioxide, NOx, and then VOC and PM2.5. And they have undertaken a couple of actions and they have connectivity. In this graph, you may not see it, but I want to show you by putting the stars. First, the most effective one would be the control of coal-fired boilers. And then it has, on average, more impacts like sorry about the background noise. I think something happened outside. But coming back to this, so you can see by controlling coal-fired boilers, having that change actually has a direct change to the energy structure of people's daily life. So it reduces a lot of the pollutants in common. And secondly, is like looking into, so first one is boiler may be more related to the commercial sector and also industrial sector. And secondly, we do like a management of residential burning, which include like an individual household. And there's a kind of policy, but which is debatable. Beijing was actually trying to change all like a household's boiler from coal to gas. But in the end, I mean, it is also related to the supply of gas. However, there's a direct good impact in terms of changing the air quality levels. And the third one is about optimizing its industrial structure that I also will share a little bit more after this. And finally, the fourth good ones is about vehicle emission control. So there are four main areas that Beijing has spent a lot of effort in making the changes, and we will go into them one by one. The first one is about controlling the coal consumption in general. As you can see from the color, coal is you can see is the gray color. From 2020, it has been continuously reduced and largely is replaced by natural gas. So this is of course like good for climate mitigation and also for air pollution reduction, given the comparison between gas and coal. But of course, if we talk about neutrality until 2050 or in China 2060, then the gas is something we need to discuss further, which is not in today's training topic. But anyway, my point is trying to show you Beijing actually has optimized its coal usage in terms of reducing significantly of the percentage. So how do they do it? So how can they reduce the coal? Basically, from the central part of the government, they have the energy development plan, and they have done a lot of effort to sort of optimize their industrial structure. That means that if you are heavy industry or if you are power plant, you must be following a more strict standard. If you cannot meet it, you have to move out from Beijing to other areas. Of course, then it will put pressure to other areas, but at the same time, it's also mobilizing the surrounding areas of a regional cooperation to further reduce the emission. Again, like for this regional mechanism, I think it can be another lecture that we can talk about that in the future. And the government has done a lot of green public procurement, from the government purchaser perspective to buy PV and heat pump and then deploy them and provide a lot of subsidies to the people in terms of their bills. And since the impact is realizing, I think they will be changing the subsidy system later. Originally, it's really want to create a good environment and incubating environment to employ the policy, but they may be tighten that later in the future. And the second part is about readjustment of the industrial structure. So I think it really depends on your city, like whether it's an industrial city or whether it's a capital or whether it's a service-based industry. But Beijing as a capital city, then by nature, it will be shifting is sorry, let me close my window a little bit. And then I think there's some background noise. Okay, sorry about this. And then as you can see, the energy consumption by sectors is also changing in Beijing, while the mainly I think the secondary, like the manufacturing industry, is reducing, and the tertiary services represented by blue and also orange color, they are increasing. What does it mean? Essentially, it's like using less energy. In that case, then less energy means less fossil fuel. That means has better input to both improving the air quality and climate change. How they do it? I think I just now already mentioned it, focusing a lot on urban planning, how to make the city more livable and people oriented, and doing transformation planning to their industry. And especially investing a lot of green tech to ensure that the future business will be driven by green technology and green businesses. And then the key action in this, and I would say the graph pretty much summarized, actually is extracted from one of the working document of a project that we work together between Seoul and Beijing City to compare their climate action. So if we can see that, I mean, actually, at the end of the day, for very urbanized area, energy would be the main issue primarily to be dealt with in terms of like improving air quality and also mitigating climate change. And then we must first, as a government, have an enabling policy environment to do regional cooperation, doing reform to the market structure, and also very importantly, setting regulation as enabling factors. So this is most important. Without this, things cannot be sustainable. And then we look into both the supply side and also demand side, or sometimes we call it energy efficiency. So in terms of supply, we need to be careful. I don't want to, I will not go into details today, but some of the policy, including the change from coal to gas, like coal to electricity, and putting renewable energies. And then there's this like energy efficiency improvement, more like from the consumption perspective, how you can actually reduce your consumption by changing the like energy efficiency pattern, and also monitor its progresses. And then there's the subsidy, or better to say, I may not want to say subsidy, but more like a financial mechanism, how to create a marketable financing mechanism to allow all both the supply side actions and also the demand side actions to really take an uptake there. So this is one of the learning from actually not just on Beijing, but also from Seoul when we do the policy research together with them. And talking about all the three cases, like please allow me to summarize. Because we work with government, so for us, rather than look into the particular number, I think what we want them to change or actually do better is to have a better institutional arrangement structure, as the cases that I shared just now. So it includes that there must be a legal basis, whether like I have a regulation or law that tackle climate change and air pollution. I think most countries and cities, they have existingly well-established laws on air pollution, but on climate may be pretty new. For example, in Beijing, they are only thinking about now because their president, Xi Jinping, announced 2016 neutrality, and the government, they now need to think about that. But what I'm trying to say is a legal basis would be very important, and setting like the responsibility and also objective for your government department, and create an enabling factor to allow cross collaboration. So we said like it's always difficult to talk to the other departments, and this is something what ICLEI we do is like by doing vertical and horizontal integration. So when we organize training, particularly, for example, to Beijing, we do not just invite the people from the environmental department. We actually ask them to invite people from the other departments together. So they will be on the same page, and then we have some focus group discussion to let them understand how the transportation department people are thinking and how the environmental department people are thinking. And that's how we are planning our capacity building towards our cities directly. And second part, like because we now talk about co-benefits and carbon neutrality and clean air strategies, we touch upon a lot of the technical inputs in the earlier presentation. And from us as a city network and government primary collaboration nonprofit organization, then we will work together with them on vertical integration, how the national governments like laws and regulation would support rather than jeopardize the local governments or the cities to establish their own strategy, which is a topic different from today, because sometimes we think even governments set up very ambitious laws would be good, but actually the local governments lack of the capacity and they don't know how to catch up with the national government. And in some cases, they would just try to find some institute and actually make a plan that could not be possible. So in that case, we spend quite a lot of time to do this vertical integration. And then we facilitate horizontal integration between the departments that I mentioned just now, and how public would be involved in this discussion. And finally, identification and implementation. And as a final work, I mean, I have almost time. So we are running network is called the East Asia Clean Air Cities. Of course, focusing on more on the East Asian country, but we also have some of the fellow cities from I think Hanoi, and also some cities in Philippines and Indonesia. They are part of it. And what we are trying is like through this network of some 15 cities to do what I mentioned just now, like including training, city to city direct collaboration. For example, we create environment between Seoul and Beijing to work together. And we serve as an intermediate body to help them to do the same research together and learn from each other. And if you are happy that I can also share more information to some of the participants today, and you are welcome to also contact me for some of the information. And I think I will finish my presentation today, 45 minutes. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Merlin.
Or should I go into the poll?
Yes, so I think Dana will help you with that.
Yeah, let me stop sharing.
Okay, let me just share my screen again for the poll. So participants can access it through the same link, the Slido link. Okay, so currently there are 16 participants here. So I'll go to the first question, and Merlin, you can talk through the question and the answers.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, this post actually is different from the previous one. It's more for us to understand whether your city has this or that, rather than it's a true or false question. So the first question is asking whether your city that has institution which coordinates air quality and climate policy together. So first, at least we see the majority, they say yes, which is good. Maybe a better question to ask in the future is to see what are these institutions, because in each country the context will be different. And more yes, in general, 70% to 30%. And I hope this question will just be a general for our record. And we hope to be in touch with the cities in the future to understand how your institutional framework is made and whether we can contribute better to that. Yeah.
So I'll move on to the next question while participants are answering.
Yes.
Oh, wait, let me go back. I'm sorry.
Yes. So the second question, I think, is pretty much similar to the first one. It's asking whether your city has an integrated climate and clean air strategy. So of course, if you have such a department, it will be a yes. If you do not have such a department, then it will be depending whether it's the environmental department or whether it's a division. So it seems this question is worth for the team of panelists and us here to take note, because it seems it's half and half. So some said yes, some said no. So even for the yes, we may need to question a little bit more how integrating it will be, because today we know the topic is more complex. So I think it's a good question and answer for us to take note.
Yeah, thank you, Merlin. So moving on to the final question, I think.
So the final question, actually, we also ask it very commonly to our other training, which sectors is or are the priorities for your city to generate co-benefits on climate and clean air. I assume that most of the attendees are from the cities, so we see a good answer. Can we move back up? Yeah, on waste, energy, transportation, industry is actually lower depending on where you are based. So if you talk about like energy, transportation, and waste, as I already said, or the other speakers already said, or even IPCC framework, they would be the main portfolio for us to address when we talk about integration. For example, like in terms of waste, and then they have the nexus, how to consider, and also how to control the methane. And energy, I don't need to repeat, is the number one source. Transportation in all the metropolitan areas they also have. Maybe here we are missing one like choice for our participants would be the buildings. And I hope like then in the future we can target these individual areas and have more collaboration with your city. And I think that's it.
Yes,
right?
that's it. So thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. I'll
Thank
hand
you,
it back to Dan.
Dina. Thank you, Merlin. And indeed, I think the discussions and also, the questions that we've received in the Q&A have also demonstrated the interest of our stakeholders in this field. And please feel free to contact us or be in touch with us if you are interested to receive more information, and we'd be glad to provide this with you. I think in the chat throughout the training, we've also provided links to resources which you can access. We will summarize all those links in the post-training email that we will be sending out. And as Merlin have quickly noted towards the end of his talk, that indeed this is something that the work has just started, I think, for most of us here, and there are a lot of opportunities to really embark on, underlining the importance of communicating and mobilizing stakeholder groups to join the movement. And so before we go to the summary of the points, I'd like to ask my colleague Shen to field a quick poll training evaluation to also help us craft or design our future trainings. So Shen, can you post the poll, please?
Yes. Wait a minute. Can you see the poll?
Yes. So if we could quickly ask our participants on a scale of 1 to 4 to gauge how much have you learned about the concepts of co-benefits and SLCPs from this training. And then the second is on a scale of 1 to 4, how much have you learned about integrating SLCPs into plans and policies? Thank you. So I think, we can give it a couple more minutes for participants to respond. One more minute. Okay, I think we have enough answers. Thank you so much, Shen. And thank you for participating in the training evaluation. So I think I would like to wrap up first by, of course, thanking our participants and also our speakers and resource persons for today. So Kay, Professor Toshi, and Professor Kim, thank you so much for joining us, the implementing partners of the project. And also, of course, recognizing the support of the UN Environment Program, the US Department of State, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, Breathe Life, the Integrated Program for Better Air Quality in Asian Cities of Cleaner Asia, IGES and ICLAY. And I think I would like to wrap up sharing that from the presentations that we heard this morning. It was apparent, of course, that COVID has presented an opportunity for us to rethink and redefine the way that we develop and implement strategies and measures to address air quality and climate change jointly, of course, in response to the overall sustainable development goals of our cities. It was highlighted that it's very important to consider the integrated relationships among the pollutants in crafting strategies, and that data and evidence is widely available to inform these decisions to consider net impacts of all components. And we've learned also that a lot of efforts have been put into building scenarios and modeling of the co-benefits that can be realized from integrated planning and operationalization of these solutions. Simply put, solutions are available. And lastly, SLCP integration has been demonstrated in processes from data gathering, policy frameworks, institutional arrangements, and stakeholder mobilization and engagement. And so the task at hand is to replicate these practices and deliver on our air quality and climate targets. So with that, I would like to thank you once again. And yes, so for all those who are asking about sharing of the presentations and recording of the training, this will be sent to you through email. So through the registration email that you have used. And yes, so thank you so much. And we will see you all in our future capacity building and training activities. Thank you, everyone.